We have, if you're new, we've been going through from the very beginning in order the story of God, and we are now moving into a period of time for God's people in which they didn't have a king, but Moses and Joshua, his successor, were no longer there. We're in this period of judges, and judges were leaders that God would call up for a specific purpose in a specific time for a specific task. And we have this entire book dedicated to those different judges, some men, some women that God would raise up, call up at different times in history. And last week we looked at Gideon. He was the judge or the leader that led God's people when they were oppressed by the people of Midian. And God's people were in this very dysfunctional pattern in their relationship with God in which they would get off the rails, they would get into trouble, they would find themselves at a point where they didn't know what to do. They would call out to God, say, please rescue us. We promise we'll never do it again. God would get them up out of their struggle, whatever the struggle was. They would find freedom, and then very quickly they were back into that same cycle. It was over and over again. Gideon was one of those leaders, those judges that God called up to lead them out when it came to the people of Midian. But they also struggled with the people of Philistia. And after Gideon was gone, they were back in trouble again. They were back in a hole in a ditch again. They called out to God and said, God, would you please help us again? And yet God in his mercy chose to do that. But it was different than Gideon with the leader that we're going to look at today. With Gideon, it was, I heard your cry. I hear what's going on. I'm calling out Gideon. You see the issue. Here we go. Today, we're going to take a look at the life of a man named Samson. And Samson was different in that God actually intervened by sending an angel to his mother first, before Samson was born. Samson's mom and dad were unable to have children for a time. There was an encounter with the messenger from God. She was told, you're going to have a child, and I want you to prepare for this child to be here because this child is going to be unique. I've got a unique calling on his life. He's going to have the label, the title of being a Nazirite, set aside for a specific purpose and time, and God was going to use him in that way. Well, there were things that a Nazirite did and things that a Nazirite did not do, and one of those was they ate no unclean food or around dead stuff, roadkill, that kind of thing. Also, they didn't drink alcohol. That was setting them apart. So he told the lady, while you're getting ready to have your child, don't drink alcohol, which is still very good for pregnant ladies today. Don't drink alcohol. Also, I want you to be very careful in what you're eating and staying away from unclean things. So she began the process of preparing for this miracle child. And you're welcome to read along in Judges chapter 13 as we get into this. We're not going to read all those verses today, but there's obviously a pretty wild interaction and a lot going on when she shows up with her husband and says, I met an angel. He says, we're going to have a child. And it's pretty cool to watch how their marriage and how that relationship processed all of that. But we're going to pick up here today when after Samson had been born and after he was beginning to become a young man, because we're told in scripture that the Spirit of God began to stir in him. So there's something different was going on with him. And we find in Judges chapter 14, verse 1, a young man, Samson, who's old enough to fall in love, in his own mind at least, fall in lust or something. We find him in verse 1, and he is traveling to another place near where the Philistines live, not with his own people. It says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives? Or among all our people. Just do self-commentary with that. Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. Translated, I don't have a single cousin that looks as good as her, therefore go get her. So a very strange thing. And anytime you're in the Old Testament with ancient history, everything is going to be very different, obviously. And there are a lot of things that need to be thought about, if not tried to explain. And this is a difficult one. But he falls in love with this girl who's a bad girl. Shouldn't be the one for him. He says, that's the one I want. Tells his parents, orders his parents, go get her for me. On another trip to Timnah, we find in a moment here that as he's traveling to see his girl, he came across some wild animals. There's a lion there. He actually has an encounter with the lion, kills the lion, and rips apart the chest cavity of the lion just as a way of going, I did this. This was my trophy, if you will. They didn't have a place to mount it. There was none of that. So I'm just going to tear it open and uniquely give my stamp on it, and I'll leave it here where it is. And so he moves on. And then in chapter 14, verse 8, it says, sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. And in it, he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate it as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. So he's traveling along. He sees what he did. He sees his trophy from earlier. We don't know how much earlier, but by this time there were bees around it. There was a swarm and some honey inside of the carcass. He chooses to go over, eat some, and then feed his parents as well without really telling them where it came from. I don't know how you get honey and take it to your mom, and I don't know how that worked out. Surely his parents weren't licking his fingers, but he brought it over and said, here's some honey. Where did you get it? Don't worry about it. I'm doing this thing. And so they eat it together. They eventually arrive in Timnah. And it's the wedding time for him. And so he has a bachelor party while I guess his bride has a bachelorette party. Very different than ours today, but nonetheless, there's a lot of celebrating. And we're even told there's a whole week. So the entire week is dedicated, not a Friday night or a weekend even. An entire week is dedicated to getting ready for the wedding. And when he is with the other bachelors, I guess we could call them his groomsmen, he's there with the groomsmen, they're having a party. And at the party, he chooses to tell them a riddle, as one does at a bachelor party. I have a riddle for you. So he tells his groomsmen this riddle, and he says, if you can figure out the riddle, I'll get all of you a brand new coat, like a new outfit for all of you. But if you don't know the answer to it, if you can't tell me by the appointed time, then all of you are going to have to give me something to wear. So they go to it's referred to as his wife, even though it hasn't happened yet, because an engagement was as good as a contract, as good as a marriage at this time. They go to his wife, if you will, and they said, hey, tell us the answer to the riddle that he gave us, or we're going to burn down your dad's house. Like that was literally what they told, which seems like extreme, but that was their thing. Tell us the answer to the riddle, or we will burn down your family home. So she goes to Samson and says, hey, what's the answer to this? And she ends up wearing him down because he's tired of her talking on and on and on. And we have this in verse 16. Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the seventh day, he finally told her because she continued to press him. So she in turn explained the riddle to her people. So the men approach Samson, and later on they say, hey, we know the answer to the riddle. And they give him the answer to the riddle. He says, you only know that because you pressed my wife. I know what's going on, but I'm going to pay my debts nonetheless. And he's so angry, he leaves them. And we don't know where he shows up other than he takes the life of 30 different men, collects their clothes, and then brings them back and says, here, I hope these fit. Like here's the debt. And then he walks away. So things are unraveling quickly. And Samson is just moving based on how he's feeling over and over. She looks good to me. I want her. Isn't there another girl? No, I'm going to actually marry her. Well, okay, we go into town. Hey, I'm going to dig something out of this dead body. You are a Nazirite. That's like top, at least number 2, if not number 1 of the things that a Nazirite doesn't do. Doesn't matter. I'm hungry. I'm at this place. Here's a riddle. I'm tired of you nagging on me. Therefore, I will risk everything and give the answer, even though financially it might hurt me along the way because I'm sick of listening to you. Okay, I'm caught now. Now I'm a little bit embarrassed and I'm a little ticked off. So I'm going to go kill some men, take just whatever he's feeling is what is happening along the way. So he loses his wife here. Her dad says, I don't think he's coming back, honey. So he gives her to somebody else. He comes back later and says, where's my wife? Her dad literally says, her younger sister is cuter anyway. So here is her. Like, man, to live during this time, I don't know. It's such a strange thing. He says, I don't want her. In fact, because you've done this to me, I'm going to burn down your wheat fields. It's just there's so much emotion and so much impulsiveness going on. In other words, there's no control. None at all. Well, eventually, Samson recovered from all of this, and he fell in lust again, and he fell in lust with a girl named Delilah. And even if you don't know the story, the entire story of Samson's life, you've probably connected Samson and Delilah. She was not one of his people either, but he fell in lust with her and says, hey, let's have a family, let's get together. So he's there with her every night. People in town are starting to realize what's going on. And Samson, by this point, the body count is really high. And everyone knows about him, and everyone wants to get rid of him, but no one knows how to because he seems to get out of every situation with blood or with fire or with something else. So she begins to try to ask him what's going on. And the people say, we'll pay you more than Samson will ever have if you'll give us the secret to his strength. So she continues to ask, he continues to lie to her. And then in Judges chapter 16, verse 15, then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her, somebody laughed. I hope you're not beside your wife right now. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. Delilah sold him out. She put him to sleep in her lap, and he's in a deep sleep. I don't know whether that's just the way he was or whether there was drink involved, but he is in a deep sleep. She has someone come in and secretly shave off his braids. And as it happened in the other times she had tried to deceive him, she woke him up and said, Samson, Samson, somebody's here. It's the whole save me, damsel in distress thing. And in verse 20 of chapter 16, she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he woke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. And then here is obviously that huge, huge statement here. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. That's that ominous point in the entire story. Like up until this point, he does whatever he wants to do, when he wants to do it. No one's disciplining him. No one's calling him out. Even as a young person, perhaps even as a teenager, he's telling his mom and dad, go get that girl for me. No, isn't there somebody else? It doesn't matter. I want her. You go do it. So his parents are even afraid to discipline him, unwilling to discipline him. He's gone through all of this. And he has so carelessly lived his life and done whatever he wanted to do, that he's now at a point where he has no idea that God has had enough and God has stepped away. God has not left him, but God's favor and blessing and power and strength are no longer with him. And he has no idea, because every time he's gotten to a problem, he's called out to God and had this dysfunctional relationship with God, which mirrored the very dysfunctional relationship that his people had had with God. He was doing the same thing. Well, God will bail me out. God always does. God always comes through. And God said, you know what? You've wanted to do your own thing and be on your own for so long. Why don't you try this? He had no idea God's strength had left him. And the fear for me, and maybe even the cautionary moment for all of us, is that could we be setting ourselves up for the same kind of moment? Minus the long hair, the braids, and the nagging Delilah, but could we be setting ourselves up for that same moment when we've always gotten into trouble before and God bails us out? It's happened over and over. And we know there are some things in our lives that we probably shouldn't allow to take our attention or allow to take some of our time or our emotion or our finances, whatever it is. But God's always come through. God's always seen us through. But are we at a point now where we have been so careless for so long with so few consequences that maybe we're already at a point now where we have no idea that God's strength has already left us? And one day we'll look up and go, what happened? For Samson, his entire life legacy was a lack of self-control. When I was a child and I was first introduced to Samson, the person, I thought, well, he's that big guy with all the muscles and all the hair he can do. It's kind of a heroic thing like that. You find him in scripture and it's almost like, who's your favorite guy in the Bible? Oh, Samson. He's got all of these characteristics. I mean, I'm a little kid playing with He-Man and Skeletor as a child going, yeah, like this is the guy. Like that's who I want to be. And then you get older and realize like, man, he is terrible. Like he's an awful person. Like everything about him, his legacy is not strength. His legacy is a lack of self-control. That's who he is. You review everything that went on. Well, I like her. Well, she's not good for you. Doesn't matter. It's what I'm feeling. I want her. Well, I'm hungry. Well, don't touch that because a Nazarite's not supposed to eat that. It doesn't matter. I'm hungry. Oh, I'm angry over here. Well, it doesn't matter. You can't kill everybody you're angry with. Why not? I'll go kill them and I'll make sure this is done. Well, I'm embarrassed. Therefore, I'll act this way. Well, you can't over and over and over. No one to stand in his way. No one to say, Samson, just think about it a moment. Nothing holding him back. He's doing whatever he wants to do. No self-control. And he gets to a point where he ruins his life. And because he cannot restrain himself, eventually other people come around and say, we'll restrain you. We'll take care of that. You can't control yourself? Well, we have some chains that might be able to do the job. He had no idea that everything that he held dear was being taken from him little by little. It reminds me of a couple of verses in the Old Testament. Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. We read, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Like there's a mastery thing here. Like you either are going to control it or it is going to control you, and you have to be careful. And most of us are so prideful, we don't think anything controls us. We control ourselves. We do what we want to do. And yet we find ourselves, when we look through our lives, there are things and moments and opportunities that always seem to trip us up every single time. And there are moments when we have to stop and say, God, I want to prove to you and I want to prove to myself that I am not being controlled by that. Therefore, I'm going to step away from this for a time. And if you can't step away from something for just 1 week, then it has you. I mean, it has more than your attention. It has got your devotion. Now, we don't want to admit that. It's a little bit like the fasting thought. Like I grew up hearing about prayer and fasting, and we don't talk about fasting nearly as much as we talk about praying because obviously it's a whole next level of devotion. Fasting is when you step away from something for a while to have that time with God, to let God know what it is that you're waiting on, leaning on, to how much you desire to have your life devoted to Him, and God does a work during those periods of times in our lives. It's usually a private thing, but it's a real thing. And I remember when I was first thinking about fasting, I thought, well, how do I fast from something? You're supposed to fast from something that's really important to you, and it's not always a food thing. And I remember as a teenager, I think it was my junior or senior year in high school, and I was eaten up with sports, especially football, and have been since I was in preschool. It's just been my thing that I love. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to fast. I'm going to fast from sports. I'm just going to, not do this. And what do? Well, I'm going to pick July because Wimbledon is the only thing happening. And then, I'm going to fast and show God, I'm letting you go. I'm going to choose not to watch SportsCenter. I'm going to pray at time. In other words, I don't really care anyway. I'll give you this time. But Lord, I'm not fasting between August and February to save my life because that is the thing. And we do that with a lot of control issues. We say, well, it doesn't have me. I tell you what, I won't eat broccoli for a whole week. I will approve, Okay, that's a big one there. We choose things that don't mean the world to us because we know there are things that have us. And it might not be a person, it might not be a food, it might not be an action, but it might be. But at some point along the way, we have to answer the question, does it have me or do I have it? And sin is crouching at your door, wanting to have you, wanting to have control. And either we have to take that back or we give up and find ourselves like Samson, just without control in a difficult moment. There's one more in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28 that says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Everything you want is in this place, in this city on a hill, this beautiful, powerful place, but it has no protection if there are no walls. He says, people are like that. You can have all the intention you want. You can have all the hopes, and you can have all the wishes, and you can have all the resources, and you can have all the talents and gifts. But if you lack self-control, all of it is being put at risk. So how do we find ourselves in a spot, or how can we keep from finding ourselves in a spot, rather, like Samson, where we have all of this, but we lose it all because of a lack of self-control? Based on things that Samson didn't do, let me encourage you with 3 things today. First is to define your calling. Bring some clarity to what it is that you believe God has called you up to do. Maybe it's for a lifetime, maybe it's for a short season of your life. And most of you are probably going to struggle with that because you don't consider yourself to have a calling. And you can use a different word, you can have, purpose or some other word, but God is going to, at every point in your life, call you to be someone, to do something. He's not just randomly placing you in places just because he doesn't have a plan for you. Calling is not just about people in ministry. He has a calling for all of you, but you need to know what your calling is. For Samson, his calling was to be the physical and spiritual leader of a people group. That was his thing. But we don't have any point in the story where we realize perhaps that Samson just stopped and thought, you know what? I know what I want to do, but this is the calling on my life. Therefore, I might just step away from that. There doesn't seem to be a real understanding of the calling on his life until he gets to the point of telling Delilah, well, this is a secret because my mom dedicated me to God when I was a kid. And it doesn't even seem to be his calling as much as it's a calling that his family just said, this is who you are. But understanding your calling, looking at your gifts, your experiences, and your opportunities, is going to be the recipe to discover your calling. And maybe the beginning is just for you and God to meet for a while and say, God, what have you called me to? What gifts have you given me? What experiences have I had along the way? What opportunities, what open doors have you given me? Because together, that's going to be the thing that you've called me to do and the person you've called me to be. I know for me, specifically, I've had to remind myself throughout the years many times of what my calling is. My calling is to teach truth in Scripture in a way that challenges believers and makes sense to those who don't yet know him. Like, that's the calling on my life. I go back to that over and over and over and over again. And I can say, well, I feel like I'm failing in this way. I can say, well, I'm not doing this thing over here very well, or I seem to be out of my league over here. I'm over my head here. But I have to step back at times and go, okay, I haven't been called to all those things. I have been called to teach the truth of God's word in a way that challenges believers, but so that an unbeliever can understand it. Because some of you are going to be believers, and I want to have you leave here with a challenge going, but that's going to be hard, but that's what truth says. But I also always want to be reminded that some of you are not quite sure what you believe, and you can leave here going, I don't know if I want that yet, but I get it. I understand the call. And sometimes doing that might make me a little vulnerable. You might walk out of here and go, I like what he said, but he's not very smart. Like, it's okay. I don't mind that. I want every single one of us to leave here understanding it. Now, you might not understand what it truly means to give your life to Jesus, but I want you to understand the facts, the bullets of what we're talking about here, because that's my calling. But some of you are called to be an educator, and you are to lead the next generation in a way that you fill in the blank. Maybe you're called to be an entrepreneur. It has nothing to do per se with ministry outright, but you're going to have gifts and purposes and opportunities that are going to allow you to be a part of God's plan and God's mission. Maybe you're just, you have the ability to make money, and you're going to be able to fund things that other people can't do. But what is the calling God has placed on your life? Define it. God has called me to. The second thing is to remember your promises. We've all made promises to someone, an employer, a group of people, a team, a coach, a spouse, to our children. A quarter of a century ago, I like saying that because it sounds epic. A quarter of a century ago or more, I made a vow to one girl. And there are times I have to look down and see this on my finger and go, okay, I've made a promise. I might feel this way, or I might want that, or I might be tempted here, but okay, I've made a promise. And I have to go back to that. There are times when I may feel a certain way. I'll pull out my phone. I got my screensaver, and one of my kids is going to be on the front always. I'm going, I've promised her this. I've promised him this. There are times I look at my own calling and go, I have a church family that God's called me to shepherd. I know I'm not perfect. I don't get it right all the time. But there are moments when I have to stop and go, these people are counting on me, and I have made an internal promise to them to try to live out what it is that I'm sharing and what I'm teaching, so that I don't disqualify myself from having any sort of validation when I'm here with you. So you are, in many ways, my reason, because I have made a promise to you, whether you realize that or not. We've all made promises to someone, to a group, whoever it might be, and there's no moment along the way where Samson seems to care about those promises. He made a vow, or he is under the vow as a Nazirite, to have no dead things around you, no alcohol, and no razor. Like, that's the top three. There are others, but that's the main three. Broken, broken, broken. Didn't seem to be an issue at all. At some point, he could have saved himself a ton of heartache if he had just stepped back and said, this is the vow that I'm under. This is what happened here between God and me, therefore. Or this is what I'm called to do. And if I do this, this is going to jeopardize all of that. The third thing is to share your dreams. That sounds a little bit kind of weird. I get that. But meaning, let someone else know who it is that you hope you're becoming. Like down the road, I hope this opportunity awaits me. Down the road, I hope this is the person I become. Let someone else that cares about you know, like, this is what I'm praying through. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I hope happens. So that you have someone else that can step alongside at some point in your life and go, oh, are you sure you want to do that? Because I know this. Are you sure you want to go there? Because I know this is important to you. And Samson had no one, not even his parents were willing to step in and say, I'm sorry, you're not doing that. I'm sorry, kid, you're underage, you're not doing it. They're like, well, that's what he wants. I mean, he wants to marry the, No, you step in. Now, what would Samson have done to someone who had, that's another story, but have someone in your life that can at least speak up and remind you of the person that you said that you want to become. And not all of you have that. Not all of us have that. We have to allow people to earn our trust in that way. But at some point, someone needs to know what's going on in here. Otherwise, you're living your life independently as Samson did, and no one was there to even for a moment say, have you thought about this? And as a result, he lost nearly everything. I'll close with the ending of this in chapter 16, verse 21. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So even with all that he had done, there's this moment of mercy. And I wish I could have known how he figured this out. Like, he has no mirror he can look into because he can't see. And at some point, he's sitting there going, what am I doing? What in the world happened? I had everything. What went on? If I had just had a little control, I would not be in this spot. And maybe he thought, what have I done? And he put his hand on his head and thought, what's that? I got a whisker. Like, what is going on? And it was God going, there's one last chapter to this story. And I don't know what your lack of control, if that's a struggle for you, has done with your hopes, your dreams, and where you are right now. But I do know that it's not over. And I do know that Samson's story is a reminder that it's never too late to say, God, I have made a mess of things, and I am a mess here. But if you'll just give me one more moment, I'm ready to give you my all. Now, in the end, and if you read through, Samson didn't go on to be a legendary leader. He had one more moment of strength, and he lost his own life in it as well. But it's a reminder that God is not finished. It's also a reminder of what could have been. His story could have been so different. And I know for all of you that God has a purpose and God has a plan. But if you lack self-control, you are putting it at risk, and there is a possibility you will sabotage everything just by your unwillingness to say, no, I'm not going to do that.